the next day or two, so anyone that missed the intro can go online. Let me just get my presentation up. Oop. Let's try one more time. There we go. So that. Okay, Rob, can everyone see that? Can you see that?
No, we cannot.
Sorry, I was muted. No, can't see it. Yes.
Now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you can still see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. There we go. All right, welcome back to those of you that were on this morning's session, and welcome to those of you who are just joining. Hopefully you're all in the right place. Today we are talking about reducing CO2 and short-lived climate pollutants from the transportation sector. Specifically, this afternoon we'll focus on potential strategies related to drayage trucks, as well as medium-duty vehicle inspections. This meeting is being recorded as of about 30 seconds ago. The recording will be made available online on the NJPACT website, along with all of the presentations that we're going to go through today. The comments that are submitted will also be uploaded to the NJPACT website, so everything will be in one place. Everyone will be muted during today's session unless you are talking. In order to ask a question, we ask that you click the hand icon that should be in the center of your screen in the toolbar. I understand that Microsoft is not compatible, so there's not a raise your hand icon. If that's the case, you can just type in the chat box that you have a question, or you could actually type your question in the chat box. We will take turns calling on people who have raised their hand or who have asked questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to answer them. Our goal is for today to be as interactive as possible. The concepts that we'll be presenting are preliminary. We're at the early stages of exploring the applicability of these rules to New Jersey, so we'd really like your open and honest feedback. When we call on you, unmute yourself. The icon for that is also right next to the hand button, or on the same toolbar as the little hand icon. If you are calling in only and are not participating with a laptop, you press *6 to mute yourself and *6 again to unmute yourself. So let's just start with a high-level overview of how we got here. So the Energy Master Plan that was released in January 2020 establishes a framework for getting us to our goal of 100% clean energy by 2050. And it lays out several pathways, including a transportation pathway that will hopefully get us there. And we'll talk about that more in a second. In addition, the governor issued Executive Order 100, also in January, and it directed DEP to do two things. One, we were to take regulatory actions to reduce CO2 and short-lived climate pollutants, and we were also directed to do a greenhouse gas monitoring and reporting rule to gather additional data on that part of the inventory. The initial stakeholdering was held in February. That focused on reductions from stationary sources only. We received significant comments during that stakeholdering session. A lot of the comments asked why we weren't also talking about transportation and mobile sources, given their impact on communities, as well as the impact to the proportion of the inventory that they comprised. So as a result of that feedback, we have held one session already. That was on September 3rd, and it covered those three topics that you see there. The comment period for that is still open. So if you are interested in submitting comments, again, go to our NJPACT website and you'll see information about how to submit comments and the deadline. Today, September 10th, we talked about California's clean truck rules this morning. This afternoon, we're going to shift gears and talk about drayage trucks, as well as medium duty inspections. And then our third and final stakeholder session will be next Wednesday, September 16th, and that will cover cargo handling equipment, including airport ground support equipment, as well as ocean-going vessels and harbor craft. So that day will be divided into a morning session and an afternoon session. All of the invites for September 16th have been sent out. If you did not receive it, please again go to the NJPACT website. There's information there for how to register for the September 16th workshops. So as I said, the Energy Master Plan that was released in January included strategies for all sectors and for all types of fuels to get us to our, what we call our 80 by 50 target. So that's shorthand for achieving 80% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2050 using 2006 as the baseline. As I said, the focus of today's meeting or this afternoon's meeting is drayage trucks and medium duty inspections. We're focusing on this sector not just because the Energy Master Plan told us to, but because we know that transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. So it's necessary to tackle that sector if we're going to achieve our 2050 goals. In addition, we cannot forget about criteria pollutants, which are still important. By pursuing some of the strategies that we're going to be talking about this afternoon and that we talked about this morning, we're going to get co-benefits. So when we electrify, we're reducing not only CO2, but also NOx and PM2.5. We know that PM2.5, black carbon, and the associated air toxics have a particularly overwhelming impact in some of our urban areas and our already overburdened communities. We also know from these, we also can see from these two pie charts that the transportation sector again contributes heavily to the total NOx emission inventory and the total PM2.5 emissions inventory. So for all of these reasons, we are pursuing the stakeholdering today and on the 16th. I think most of you are already aware that diesel emissions come with a bevy of health impacts, none of which are pretty. The most compelling one to me has always been the last one here. We know that diesel emissions pose the highest cancer risk of any air toxic emitted in New Jersey. So again, many reasons to move forward to explore some of the electrification strategies we're going to talk about today. We also know that if we do this right, if we prioritize electrification in some of our most heavily trafficked areas and some of our urban areas, we're going to provide significant benefits to the people that live in those communities. I mentioned black carbon briefly. If we look at the avoided health outcomes that can be achieved by reducing black carbon and PM2.5, we know that there is an enormous health savings as a result of that. So one of the assumptions in the Energy Master Plan to get to our 2050 goal was that 75% of the medium duty sector and 50% of the heavy duty sector should be electrified by 2050. So the drayage truck concepts that we're going to talk about would help us achieve this assumption that was in the Energy Master Plan. As I said, the Energy Master Plan had many different strategies encompassing all sectors in New Jersey. The first strategy focused on transportation. And as I said, the strategies were diverse and widespread, ranging from reducing vehicle miles traveled to electrification to building smart villages and improving walkability of towns to get from a residence to public transportation. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about a few of the things that we are already doing to reduce emissions from transportation. So a couple months ago, Governor Murphy joined, I think, 15 other states and jurisdictions in signing an MOU that commits us to working together to electrify the medium and heavy duty sector. There are interim targets of 30% of new truck and bus sales being zero emissions by 2030, increasing to 100% of sales as electric by 2050. As part of this MOU implementation, we will be doing stakeholdering and developing an action plan. And we will be reaching out to many, if not all of you, to help us with that action plan and to get your feedback as we move forward. These are the states and jurisdictions that sign the MOU. You'll note that it's not just the Northeast, it's also the West Coast. And then interestingly, Colorado plopped there in the middle and Hawaii have also signed. We also have sources of funding that we have been funneling towards medium and heavy duty electrification. The governor has committed that all of the Volkswagen settlement, all 72 million, will be directed towards electrifying the transportation sector, whether it's cargo handling equipment, ground support equipment, or New Jersey transit buses. 10.8 million will also be dedicated to the associated EV charging infrastructure. We have settlement money from several different defendants, including Fiat and Bosch, that are also being used for transportation electrification. Fiat and Bosch are just one example of some of the other funding sources that we've been able to get. And then finally, the RGGI Strategic Funding Plan was released not too long ago, and that directs BPU, EDA, and New Jersey DEP to use its RGGI money largely for transportation electrification, as well as providing clean mobility options to urban communities. And I think this is my last slide. The EV law passed in January 2020 has a lot of goals for light duty electrification, but it also requires DEP to develop an action plan and set goals, numerical and otherwise, for medium and heavy duty electrification and the associated charging stations. So all of these things are working hand in hand and complement each other. So the action plan that we'll develop under the EV law will be synchronized with the action plan that we're developing regionally with the 15 other states and jurisdictions that sign the MOU. Similarly, the RGGI money and the Volkswagen money and all of that will be used to help us determine the success of the funding and the electrification for individual types of vehicles and determine where future money can best be put. And that is the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing here and turn it over to who's next. I'm sorry, is it Jeff or Rob?
It's me.
It's Rob again, okay. Okay, so Rob, whenever you're ready, go ahead and share your screen and we'll talk about medium duty inspections.
All right, give me one sec. Should share. Okay, can you all see the first slide?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. So this morning we talked about a lot of strategies that involved electrification of medium and heavy vehicles, but we also talked about the California low NOx omnibus rule that limits the emissions of non-electrified engines. So this is a strategy that kind of fits in that realm. You know, one of the questions that came up was, well, what are we doing for in-use vehicles to ensure that they aren't emitting excess pollution? And what we want to talk about today is inspection of medium-duty diesel vehicles, since this is a sort of a hole in our program that we might want to plug to regulate emissions from in-use vehicles. And we know it's a significant hole, but let's get into it here. So the overview, we'll talk about what regulations we'd like to consider changing. I'll give you some statistics for medium-duty fleet, and then I'll talk about why we think it would be a good idea to inspect medium-duty diesel vehicles. You know, if you say that too many times too quickly, it comes out medium-duty anyway. Medium-duty diesel vehicles, and then we'll talk about the current and proposed inspection procedures. So go through this. So the concept here is that we would require medium-duty diesel vehicles to be subject to the same inspection requirements as other heavy-duty diesel vehicles. to give you a little bit of background, our inspection program in New Jersey is jointly administered by us, the Department of Environmental Protection, and the Motor Vehicle Commission, MVC. We essentially create the standards and test procedures and the emission test requirements, and motor vehicles overlays with any safety inspection requirements and the inspection frequency and where those vehicles go to get inspected and who or what vehicles need to be inspected. So for quite a few decades now, medium-duty diesel vehicles have sort of been a carve-out. They're the only, practically the only vehicles in our program that are allowed to self-inspect. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means and what it doesn't mean. So first of all, I need to define medium-duty diesel vehicles for New Jersey, because this is not a normal definition. Normally, medium-duty is like 8,500 to 14,000. Well, our heavy-duty diesel smoke capacity inspection program kicks in at 18,000 pounds, and the cutoff for light-duty inspection is 8,500. So this is a population of vehicles between 8,500 pounds and 18,000 pounds. So it's not your typical medium-duty definition, but for the purpose of this presentation and this discussion, I mean the vehicles between 8,500 and 18,000 pounds. So this is a little chart I had from this morning for those of you who were on, to give you an idea of the vehicle classes that we're talking about. So this proposal would hit Class 2B, Class 3, Class 4, and some Class 5 vehicles. So it's a lot, encompasses a lot of Class 2B vehicles, are a lot of pickups and vans, up through like delivery vehicles and box trucks and things of that nature. Nothing in the terribly heavier range, but things in that range that you can see here. So this is a chart that I brought up this morning to give you a breakdown of the medium and heavy vehicle population in New Jersey by class. Almost half of the medium and heavy vehicles from Class 2B through Class 8 are in Class 2B, which are basically pickups, SUVs, cargo vans, things of that nature. Class 3 gets into the box trucks and like the UPS and FedEx delivery trucks. But a lot of vehicles in this range are Class 2B, which is the lightest of the category. But this concept is only dealing with those that are diesel. So this is all of them. So we looked at just the ones in the 8,500 pound to 18,000 pound range that are diesel fueled, and that is about 100,000 vehicles. So it's a portion of the Class 2B, 3, and 4s, and some 5s. So it's about 100,000 vehicles that would be impacted by this, that are currently subject to self-inspection. Looking at the ownership, it's pretty near even split, about 55% commercial and 45% private. You see a lot of private at that range, again, because it's the Class 2B, so a lot of these are privately owned diesel pickup trucks, which are one of the biggest problems for tampering, but we'll get there. So why do we think we want to inspect medium-duty diesel vehicles? I mean, there's the obvious ones, like, well, why not? We inspect everything else, but we'll go down the list here. For emission reductions, these are some factoids that our Bureau had come up with. To equal the same inspection benefit of inspecting one medium-duty diesel truck, you would need to inspect 12 gasoline vehicles. That's pretty significant in terms of leaving this 100,000 vehicles out. And the benefits of collectively inspecting all these vehicles on a periodic basis would be equal to taking 90,000 cars off the road. Again, it's a pretty significant benefit. We're talking about 121 tons per year of NOx and 31 tons per year of PM. So that's significant. It's not a small hit. Reason number 2, it's a fairly cost-effective control measure. It would not impose any ongoing fees on the state for inspection, because all the medium-duty diesel inspections could be sent to the private inspection facilities. In fact, as I'll mention later, they actually would have to be. And the emission reductions are quantifiable, and it's a relatively small investment on the part of the state. Any increased costs would be borne by the vehicle owners, not by the state, and basically that's increased cost just for the inspection itself. Cost of repairing failures and tampering, I don't consider to be an added cost, because theoretically, if these owners are self-inspecting their vehicles and keeping them in compliance now, they're already making these repairs, right? So this is not an added cost. The added cost is only inspection itself. So another reason to inspect them. A lot of them are registered and operated in urban EJ areas. So these areas are already at risk from excess amounts of pollution, disproportionately impacted. So again, controlling emissions, particularly PM and NOx from these vehicles in those areas, would only serve to benefit those communities even more. So we've been doing some our department, DEP, has been doing some tampering investigations on medium-duty diesel vehicles offered for sale in dealers' lots. We don't really have the authority to, go out to owners and ask to inspect their vehicles, but one place where we can collectively see groups of these vehicles is when they're on dealership lots. So this is the results of some investigations we conducted from 2018 and 2019, and we have an average tampering rate of about 24% of the vehicles that are sitting on the lots that we find. I don't have the precise statistics in front of me, but in terms of tampering rates that we've seen on light-duty gasoline vehicles through the normal course of those that undergo inspection, the tampering failure rate is like, I'm pretty sure it's under 1%. So a 24% failure rate on tampered vehicles, on vehicles being tampered, is pretty significant in our view. So you may have seen we did a press release in July of this year, and this just summarizes it. There's a lot more to the press release, but our department is taking an enforcement action against one of the largest auto auction companies, Manheim. They move tens of thousands of vehicles probably a month. I don't know what the statistics are, but they move a lot of vehicles. So we did a surprise visit to their facility one day, and on this one, they're the line that says dealer number 7. We inspected 50 vehicles and 14 of them were tampered, so 28% of them were tampered. I mean, that's 50 vehicles out of probably thousands and thousands and thousands that were on their lot. There's only so much we can look at in a short period of time. But we did go through some of their records, their electronic records, and they clearly identified at least 200 vehicles that we could easily see that were disclosed as being tampered. I mean, they looked at them and they said, oh yeah, this vehicle is missing emission controls. They actually documented it for us, not for us, for their purposes, but we could see that these vehicles are tampered with. It's become so blatant that people just talk about it as a matter of course. They don't even know that it's illegal. So that goes into some of our issues that we have with self-inspection. Outside of our anti-tampering investigations, you can find owners of medium-duty diesel vehicles advertising them with blatantly tampered emission controls. You can go on Facebook Marketplace and Instagram and other Craigslist, other resources, and you'll see vendors offering devices and people selling services to install or, in this case, actually remove emission controls, or to sell vehicles that have these removed. I mean, people actually list these vehicles for sale as a selling point that, oh, the EGR has been removed, the DPF has been removed, so you don't have to worry about that in the future. Well, yeah, we worry about it. It's your emission controls. So it's a real thing. The US EPA has also been doing some investigations of defeat devices. They've been doing it for a number of years. I see documents looking back to at least 2015, but before that. And they have levied some fines against some sellers of defeat devices. By defeat devices, I mean those vendors that are selling like EGR delete kits. That you can take the EGR out and put a solid plate over it, and then plug a tuner into the OBD system to tell it so it won't turn on the check engine light. Those tuners, by the way, are a form of tampering. It's just electronic tampering. So in 2017, in the state of Utah, a citizens group didn't feel that EPA was moving fast enough, so they launched their own citizens lawsuit against companies selling defeat devices that had been featured on a show called The Diesel Brothers. Never seen the show, but apparently they, showcased vehicle tampering. Hey, thanks, Discovery Channel. So between that lawsuit and EPA, they've levied millions of dollars in fines against companies selling defeat devices. So it's a real problem. In addition, we have this coal rolling or rolling coal concept, where people deliberately modify their pickup trucks to produce excess smoke. They usually like to smoke out, Priuses and bike riders and things like that. They think it's cool. I don't know what's going on there, but hold on, my presentation locked up. There you go. So in 2015, a law was signed in New Jersey outlawing the concept of rolling coal. I mean, technically, it's already against our regulations in terms of the emissions of excess visible smoke. We've had that law on the books for a long time, but I guess there was an impetus to create some additional law here in 2015. Again, it's hard to enforce this if you're not inspecting the vehicles. If you see a vehicle doing it on the road, a police officer could pull them over and cite this law. But otherwise, we don't know people are doing it. If you inspect a vehicle, you can see if it's been modified, if it has emission controls removed, or if it has a rolling coal switch installed, which is what they usually do. So I'm not going to go through all this, but in terms of all these regulations, but the current self-inspection requirements for medium-duty diesel vehicles are that the owner or lessee of the vehicle is supposed to certify that it's in compliance with DEP emission standards and all applicable requirements and test procedures. There's a checklist they're supposed to go down, and one of those items includes that they certify that the exhaust emission and exhaust system, and exhaust emissions meet the requirements of DEP regulations. And they're supposed to provide a certification to the Chief Administrator of the Motor Vehicle Commission annually that they've done this. To our knowledge, no such form for submitting that certification or such certifications have ever been received or requested by the MVC, but I believe they're here. They can speak for themselves when we get to that point. The current requirements for self-inspection under our regulations, like I said, we regulate what inspection tests are required, emission inspections are required for a vehicle. So for self-inspection, the owner is supposed to check for the presence of visible smoke, to check all the indicator lights, which would be the MIL for the OBD system, any DPF and SCR lights, look for visible fuel leaks, and confirm that all the emission control apparatus is intact and in place. That's what they're supposed to do, and that's what they're supposed to certify every year. Now, these are all non-instrumented tests that don't require any equipment. So we're not requiring them to have an OBD scan tool or to connect to an inspection workstation or to do an instrumented tailpipe smoke opacity test or anything like that. These are just tests that can be done visually. So they're intended for people to be able to self-inspect visually without any tools or equipment. They do, however, require some knowledge and training to know what emission controls to look for, and that knowledge and training has never been imparted or disseminated. So we have a deficiency on all of us there that we haven't really explained what they're supposed to look at. So what we're proposing, if we were to move forward with this, is simply that medium-duty diesel vehicles be subject to the same inspection requirements as heavy-duty diesel vehicles are already subject to in New Jersey. And that is for the 8,500 to 14,000, 2007 older, they'd get a smoke opacity test. For 2008 and newer, they'd get an OBD test. For heavier 14,018, same thing. The older ones would get 2013 and older would get smoke opacity. The newer ones could get an OBD test. They would all continue to get visible smoke, fuel leak, indicator lights, and a complete anti-tampering inspection. So again, nothing different than what's already required of the heavy-duty vehicles. All of these inspections would have to be directed to private inspection facilities, which is under that direction is under the purview of MVC and not DEP regulation, so we can't require it. MVC would have to require it. The thing is that only the private inspection facilities are equipped with smoke meters. The central inspection facilities, the lanes that Parsons operates, are not equipped with smoke meters. So to check the older vehicles for smoke opacity, they would have to go to private inspection facilities. So that, in a sense, that takes a little bit of the burden off the state. Just direct them to the PIPs. So we're asked to think about some alternatives, and I'll ask all of you to think about some alternatives. If we don't bring these vehicles in for inspection, how can we fairly ensure compliance across this 100,000 set of vehicles? Is there a way to do some sort of an enhanced reporting requirement? And I said they're supposed to submit a certification to MVC once a year. What if DEP set their own reporting requirement, so these owners have to report detailed results of their inspections, including emission controls and photos, to DEP? What if we did our own reporting requirement? What if we equip the vehicles with telematics to track them and to give us OBD, essentially continuous OBD information? We could do random spot checks with enforcement, randomly selected mini PEMs. I mean, these are very expensive options, but we're just kind of thinking of ideas here. Another thing that came to me, I didn't get a chance to put this on here, is maybe an enhanced education and outreach effort to really educate these owners on what it means to self-inspect emission controls and, what is actual tampering. Maybe that could be part of the process here as well. So we're looking for ideas on how we could make this work. Just inspect them like everything else, or if there's some other strategy we could employ. With that, go to the discussion issues, and it's basically just what I pretty much said. Yeah, just looking for ideas here. So I'm going to pause and leave that open and go back to Teams here.
Okay, so this would be the time for you to click on the hand icon in the toolbar if you'd like to ask a question, or type your question in the chat box. We'll give you all a few minutes to do that, and then we'll call on you in the order that the hands were raised or the comments were received. I'm not seeing any comments or questions in the chat box, and I don't think any hands are raised. Is that right, Monica?
No hands are raised.
Okay. We have 56 people on the call, so either you all think this is a great idea and we should move forward in working with MVC to do rule changes, or you're so flabbergasted that we've just left you speechless. I'm not sure which it is. I'm
I'm sure it's the
hesitant.
former, Peg. It's the former for sure.
Yeah. I'm hesitant to close this session because we do have a good bit of time left, and we really did want to try to start a dialogue. So please don't be afraid to ask a question or give us your opinion. If you have experience with other jurisdictions that have done this or that are trying to do this, we'd appreciate hearing about that as well. I see one person, Zach, thank you, says it's a great idea. So we have 1 in support, 55 more to go.
Are there any thoughts folks have about what they're seeing in terms of diesel vehicle tampering that they want to speak to? Anything to help us along?
Okay. Amy can go ahead and speak.
Yeah, sorry. I figure I might as well since you need something. I think it's a good idea. I think it's challenging given you have so many are sort of in the private sector. They're not fleets. People who, I assume it includes people who are working on a farm or, whatever. So some people are pretty scattered all over the place. Although I appreciate the map that you did about the EJ concentrations. I have a lot of lawn care businesses around me, and so I assume that those are the trucks that fit into that. And next door, the guy did his home repair on his, he had 5 guys helping him fix his truck, and who knows what he was doing, right? So he spent all Sunday fixing it as opposed to going to a dealer. So, people again some people living on the edge. And doing this kind of homegrown repairs, which can create some of these problems. But what I wasn't exactly clear is you're going to send people to inspect in private, inspection locations. But, like on my car, I have a sticker that says, go get your car inspected at a certain time. Is that what they're going to get? They're going to have a sticker that says, go now, it's your time?
Yes, it won't. Once the vehicles would be brought into the program, our enforcement mechanism right now is windshield stickers. So yes, it would be just like your light duty vehicle now, where it's a good for a year or 2 years, whatever we set as the inspection frequency. Yes, it would be the same concept. So,
and then what's the unless I missed it, what's the penalty for people? Is it
same as it is now? If the police pull you over with an expired sticker, or when you're supposed to have a sticker and you're not, it would be just a ticket for failure to inspect.
Right, but then when you get to actually inspect and you see somebody's tampered,
you fail. You fail and you have to get it fixed.
Is there a fine that goes along with the failure?
No, traditionally in the inspection process, the penalty is you fail inspection until you get it fixed. That we don't penalize them any further. Right. They just have to spend the money.
Well, I know I've seen lots of cars that never get them fixed. So,
yes.
Okay. And if somebody keeps their vehicle, say it's a farm vehicle, and they keep their vehicle on their private property, and are there different rules for that? It's kind of like on-road versus off-road.
There are some different requirements for farm vehicles, but I'm not the keeper of those regulations. MVC is, so I'm not precisely sure if farm vehicles have to be inspected or not. Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head.
So, like, the reason, and partly I bring this up, I'm not sure that there are many port medium duty. Well, maybe there are. I don't know. I don't think about it that much, but there's cargo handling equipment and other kinds of things. I don't, what you're talking about is things with wheels, right?
Yes.
As opposed to, say the yard tractor. Now the yard tractor may be too heavy and may not fit. I'm not sure what the weight is, but they follow different rules. They're an off-road vehicle. They don't actually follow the same rules as a truck, even if it's the same weight. So I'm not sure what fits and doesn't in a port setting, but I'd be interested to know that and what's on versus off-road and if the rules are different.
Okay.
Right, Peg? There is a difference. There are some differences. It may not apply here, but there are some differences.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying. I don't think it applies here. I think the vehicles that we are proposing be inspected would not be the ones that are captive on the port property, like the cargo handling equipment.
Right. Because they're still too heavy, even those are too heavy.
Okay, Ryan Hamill has a question, so he can go ahead and unmute himself and ask his question.
Sure, it was more just a comment. I'm with Ryder Transportation. I'm a development manager for Ryder. I'm in New York, but we have locations in New Jersey. And just more in support of inspecting trucks for this sort of thing. You know, I know Ryder keeps records for DPF filter cleanings and all the engine technology, you know, new emissions technology. So, you know, vendors such as Ryder, Penske, there's some local, you know, truck providers, and, you know, we keep records. I know the EPA comes to the New York facilities every now and then and inspects them, but anything more, a sticker, you know, partnering with, you know, businesses, maintenance providers like Ryder and those guys is a great thing. So just, that's really it. Just a comment that I think going in that direction, more enforcement is a good thing.
Thanks for doing your part, Ryan.
I don't think a lot of the fleet operators are likely to be the problem. It's the, you know, the personally owned pickup trucks that are usually the tampering targets.
Yeah, but like that dealer you said where you inspected like 50 of them, you know, like I could see maybe showing up at a Ryder or Penske and doing something there and finding maybe some out of compliance and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ezra has a question or comment, so he can go ahead and unmute himself.
Great, thank you. This is Ezra Finken again with the Diesel Technology Forum. One comment, two questions. First of all, just to let folks on the webinar here know that you know, the manufacturers, our members, our industry, we're all on board with discouraging, prohibiting tampering. Lots of money, enormous amount of resources went into developing emission controls, and our folks want to make sure that the technology that was developed is performing as it was intended. So in no way, shape, or form does the industry support tampering in any way. The two questions I have, one, just to make sure I know what's going on with the proposal. This is just for on-road vehicles, not off-road.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Second question. I'm just curious, and again, I might have missed it in the presentation, and I apologize. But just to know, you folks are proposing to use private inspection facilities to test the heavy-duty trucks. What's the capability of the existing companies out there? I'm just curious if there's already a bunch of private sector inspection facilities capable of going at some of these trucks. Just curious.
Peg, Jeff here. I can respond to that. So for those who aren't aware, the inspection facilities that are the state licenses, which we refer to as the private inspection facilities, number in total about 1,500. Of those, about 300 are licensed to inspect diesel vehicles, to perform the smoke opacity inspection that Rob was talking about. So it'd be those roughly 300 facilities statewide that we would be pointing the medium duty vehicles to.
Right, and we have, so just to do the quick math, we have 21 counties, 300 private inspection facilities. And Rob, what was the number of medium duties?
It's about 100,000. It's about 100,000 heavy duties that need to be inspected now, and it would add about another 100,000 of medium duty diesel vehicles. Sorry. So in terms of the capacity of those 300 facilities, it would double the inspections they process, but they don't see a very high volume now. Again, this morning I spoke about the breakdown of the whole medium and heavy duty population in New Jersey. All vehicles from Class 2B through Class 8 is 500,000 vehicles out of 6.7 million population. So again, it's not a heavy lift for the PIFs that do diesel inspections to be able to add on these additional 100,000 or so.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question?
Sure.
Of course.
So again, I don't really know the answer. That's why I'm asking it. So like for my car, I think it was the first year there was OBD. So when I do my inspection test, I'm in Maryland, they just plug in and I'm there for like 30 seconds and they're able to determine whether or not I meet emissions. Do you know the population of heavy duty trucks that have that capability? I'm just curious if there's a good number. So for example, I think in New Jersey, like a little less than half the trucks are model year 2010. And I'm wondering if that means that they're also OBD compliant. So it wouldn't be too onerous for folks to just show up for a 45-second appointment to plug in and then, you know, they're on their way, versus someone who's there for a little bit longer because more involved equipment has to be used to determine whether or not they're meeting the standard.
I can answer that in several ways. One, the OBD requirement for heavier duty vehicles is for model year 2008 and older, it's 8,500 to model year 2008 and newer, 8,500 to 14,000 are equipped with OBD, and for 2013 and newer, it would be the 14,000 to 18,000 range. I don't have the numbers of vehicles that fall into each of those bins, but it's a fair number. I mean, I'm going to say it's probably at least half of those vehicles are OBD equipped. But to further fill out your answer, although we would do an OBD inspection on those newer vehicles, we're also, one of the more critical pieces here is the anti-tampering inspection. So that would involve looking under the vehicle, opening the hood, and looking for emission controls. They are supposed to be doing that now by regulation, but we know it's not actually happening.
Thank you.
I wanted to jump to the chat box. There's a suggestion from Joe Spinelli, which is since the areas that were identified in Rob's map are predominantly highly populated areas, can we look into some of the new remote sensing technology? So I guess that's a technology question as well as a contracting question, whether the inspection contract would allow that form of technology to be used.
Technology-wise, we've looked at remote sensing on several occasions. We do know there have been some developments in the use of it for diesel vehicles. California has done some work on that, and they've developed a portable system of their own, kind of a homegrown system. It can be done, but it only captures a very limited population, and it's the problem with remote sensing is it's super expensive. It really is. I mean, it's sending everybody to inspection is trivial in cost compared to renting or building remote sensing units and getting enough deployment over enough areas to actually catch enough vehicles to make it meaningful. And there are so many variables with remote sensing in terms of the mode of operation of the vehicle, what load it's under, where you site the equipment. There have been issues with, how do we site the equipment to get permission to set up the equipment on roadside? So it's certainly not an impossibility. The concept of remote sensing keeps recurring to us. Mm-hmm. We wish we could afford to do it, but at this point in time, it's just not something that is readily affordable by us. The technology does exist and can handle diesel vehicles, though.
I don't see any more hands raised or anything in the chat box. We'll give it a few more minutes.
There was another comment in chat about the time to do a full emission inspection. Yeah, 45 minutes an hour. Yeah, if they're doing a full anti-tampering inspection, and they've got to do a smoke opacity test and, hook, clamp on the smoke meter on the pipe and all that. Yeah, I could see it taking that long. Jeff, you have more experience with the diesel PIFs. Does that sound about right to you too?
Yes, it does. Most of them, I won't get into the details of how they charge for their inspections and what the MVC's regulations allow them to do, but most of them basically charge 1 shop hour of labor to do the inspection.
Right, that sounds about right. If anyone wants to submit comments, let me share the last slide I had here as I did from this morning. There's the, if anyone wants to submit comments, there's the email address mailbox that we're using. It's NJAirRulesMobile@dep.nj.gov. Put medium duty diesel inspection in your subject line, and we're taking comments through September 24th.
I know some of our MVC colleagues are on the line virtually or by phone. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but you are welcome to provide your opinion or comments on this as well. So we were scheduled to go until 2:20. I'm sorry, there's an echo. Not sure why. So, Rob, do you think we should close this out now and move on to the next session, or do you have additional prompt questions that you'd like to give? I see Joe has his camera on. Joe, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, we just got back to doing testing out on the roadside, and we're still trying to work on the pilot program for medium duty diesels. I'd like to see that program bear out, bear its fruit before we move further. That's all I had.
Okay.
Could Rob or Joe provide just a little more detail on what that pilot program is without tipping off what we're planning to do? Just the basic concept and the timing of it, maybe, for the audience.
From what I know of it, as part of our regular roadside inspection program for diesel vehicles, we're planning to do a pilot test of adding pullovers of medium duty diesel vehicles into that, in which we would pull them over and look for any signs of tampering or excess smoke. I don't know much about the actual protocol, and I don't know how much that's been resolved in terms of identifying vehicles for pullover, and I don't know how well. I know there's some points of contention over whether the locations will be a good match for pulling over the vehicles in communities like the landscaper trucks versus trucks on the interstates, which might not be the ones we want to get at, instead of the neighbor's diesel pickup that they're tampering with down the street from you, kind of thing. So I'm not sure how that's going to pan out, but again, your data will show. We'll see what we see from that study.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, and it's we're not just glancing over the project.
No. We definitely want to move forward with this, and we hope we see something from it. I'm just being cautious in the sense that, as with any roadside pullover, even remote sensing, you don't always get the vehicles that you really want to get. because they're not the ones that are on the roads at the places and times that you would see them. But that's a caveat.
but that's-
any
then
study
you-
like this.
But in any study, that's considered profiling, and it's going to skew your numbers. So, just putting that out there, we're going to take a sampling of the vehicles traveling down the road. We're not going to profile a specific class of vehicles. That would include a specific class of drivers. That would include a specific class of people. You see where this goes.
Absolutely. We would not suggest that any profiling be done. We're just talking about siting and location and what kinds of vehicles you're going to get at different locations. Right. No, I'm not suggesting by any means that, I mean, if it's a medium duty vehicle, you pull it over. I don't care whether it's clean or dirty or has smoke coming out or not. It's just that's your random sample. That's all.
Correct.
Totally understand. It should be random. No profiling.
There we go. Okay. All right, Rob.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for that, Joe. Glad
Yep.
to hear you guys are moving forward with it. I know we had some setbacks because of COVID and things being shut down, and you have a lot of work getting the regular inspection lanes up and running. So I appreciate that you have this back on your radar and are moving forward with it.
Oh, absolutely. It was just a matter of what the temperature is out there, for the state police to partner with us to do it. So, all right, that's all.
Yep. Very good. Thank you, Joe, for weighing in.
Take care.
Thanks.
Not a problem.
Peg, I don't have anything else if no one else has any comments. I know some people may have been split in terms of when they were joining the afternoon, but I would think if they're here, they're probably here for the afternoon now, and we could just go ahead and move on, but I don't want to be the sole arbiter of that.
Yep. I think the disclaimer, the fine print at the bottom of the agenda is we were going to start at 1 o'clock and move forward, and things might not happen exactly when we say they were going to happen. They might happen earlier, but they certainly wouldn't happen later. So I would suggest, unless anybody on the phone has objections, that we continue to move forward and switch gears to talk about drayage trucks. Let me pause for a second. Raise your hand or type in the chat box if you have objections to moving on 20 minutes early to the next segment. Okay. Silence is assent, so let's go ahead and move on. So next up is Jeff Cantor. Jeff has an impressive resume as well, just as impressive as Rob's, I guess I would say. Long-term DEP employee, specific expertise in medium and heavy-duty vehicles. So he'll be covering this part of the presentation about California's drayage truck rules. So Jeff, go ahead when you're ready and share your screen.
All right. If I push the right buttons, everyone should be looking at the introductory slide here for drayage truck regulatory concepts. Is that correct?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
All right. So for those who were with us this morning with Rob's initial discussion of some of the other things that California has been doing, this sort of fits in with that. It's another angle to push for the adoption of specifically zero emissions electric vehicles in the drayage truck market and the drayage truck industry. So it goes in hand with the ACT, the Advanced Clean Truck rules that Rob covered this morning, and also the Zero Fleet rules that he covered this morning. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the concepts we're considering. I'm going to give a little bit of an outline of what New Jersey's drayage fleet looks like, what their emissions look like, why they're important to us. Talk a little bit about how this concept might work, leaning heavily again on what our colleagues out in California are doing or proposing to do. We'll talk a little about where they are. That process is ongoing. We'll talk a little bit about some of the specifics of electric drayage trucks, what's available from the industry, what their limitations and capabilities are, where they fit well, where there might be some issues. And then, since the primary purpose of all of these sessions today is to get your collective feedback and input and ideas, hopefully you won't have to listen to me too long, and we'll get into the questions that people have and discussion issues, etc. So the conceptual proposal, the concept that we're looking at is following along with what California is actually basically just starting working on, and that is updating their regulations to require electrification of the drayage fleet. California does have regulations on the books dating back to 2007 when they were first adopted, and they started implementation in 2009. I believe they are fully implemented now. It regulates the model year, specifically engine model year, of vehicles, of trucks that are allowed to serve as drayage, in drayage service at the various port facilities. They are now looking at amending those, updating those regulations, as I say here, to work towards a full electrification of the fleet once they're adopted by California. New Jersey has the option, as many other states do as well, of course, to adopt those regulations by reference. The drayage trucks, I'm assuming most folks here are familiar with this, but these are the trucks that do the short runs in and out of the port. They bring empty containers in to receive goods. They bring import full containers that have come in by ship from the port out to distribution facilities, warehouses, whatnot. They also bring full containers back to the port from local, some of those same local distribution and warehouse facilities, but also from manufacturers and others in the area. The data that we have indicate about 12,000 truck visits to the port daily, and almost half of those are pre-2010 vehicles. I should pause here and say that the statistics I'm showing you here all come from our friends at the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. They do a phenomenal job of inventorying their fleet and facilities and the things going on at the port, and making that information available to everyone, which is very helpful. There are some other facilities in the northern part of the state, in and around Newark and Elizabeth, that are not under their control, so those statistics I have here would be a little bit larger for the North Jersey facilities. And the port facilities in the southern part of the state, in and around Camden and Gloucester City, have similar situations, but those facilities are a good deal smaller. One difference that we do have here in New Jersey from California is our drayage fleet appears to be largely made up of individual owner-operators rather than large fleets. So that will have some logistical impacts, and we'd certainly like your collective input on that as we go along here. More from the Port Authority's inventory from 2018, just showing the age of the trucks, as I was saying. As you can see, well more than half were still in that older pre-2010 category. Why are we interested in all this? Well, as Peg had shown in her initial presentation, we got started this afternoon. Mobile sources are still a major portion, significant contributor to air pollution for various pollutants. They're second and largest air sources of VOCs, largest source of NOx, nitrogen oxides, by far the largest source of CO, of carbon monoxide, and a very significant source of particulate matter as well. When we look more closely at the port, we can see, I've pulled out these orange pie pieces, the heavy-duty diesel vehicles that are part of the port operations. Those are the drayage trucks, and they are the majority of every one of these pie pieces, with the exception of NOx, where they're only overshadowed slightly by ocean-going vessels. Since we're looking with a lot of what we're talking about here today at greenhouse gases, we should also point out that they are exactly half of the greenhouse gas emissions from the port facilities. So anything we can do to reduce those orange pie pieces would be nice. The impacts of all of this, as we said earlier, roughly 12,000 truck visits to the port each day. And in order to get to the port, they're either going through or right near numerous residential neighborhoods in and around the Newark and Elizabeth areas. And again, these statistics come from the Port Authority of Newark, New Jersey, so they're dealing with those facilities up north, but the situation is very much the same in Camden and Gloucester City. The port facilities may be smaller, their focus is a little bit different. They tend to deal more with bulk commodities than container freight, but the stuff still comes into the port on these drayage trucks, and they're still going right through or right past residential neighborhoods, many of them suffering from major impacts from numerous different environmental issues. So what's CARB's approach? CARB, the California Air Resource Board, currently has regulations that I mentioned before that limit the age and emissions technology of trucks calling on their ports to 2007 specifications. They have just begun development of updated regulations that I put here likely because, again, they're just starting this. They have made some public comment on their intentions, but neither we nor they know exactly where they're going to end up. That would require drayage trucks to transition to all-electric, zero-emission vehicle technology. They have stated that they're thinking about a phase-in schedule starting in 2024 and likely a full transition to all electric vehicles by 2030. The benefits of electrification, pretty straightforward. You eliminate all of the local truck emissions. As I was just saying about the residential neighborhoods, the EJ communities that are living right around the ports, this is especially critical when it comes to the PM2.5 emissions and all of their associated health impacts. But we also reduce the greenhouse gas emissions significantly, which is another major part of this. Drayage trucks probably are one of the better areas at the moment for electrification when it comes to the total fleet of heavy-duty trucks. They tend to be on an urban stop-and-go driving scenario, where electric vehicles tend to be more efficient. They're going relatively short distances. In most cases, they're not going hundreds and hundreds of miles across country. They're going from, say, Newark, Elizabeth area to the wider Essex and Union County, maybe into Middlesex County and the warehouse and distribution facilities in and around Cranberry, etc. So they're not going from the port in most cases to Western Pennsylvania or Ohio or something like that. They tend to work on somewhat predictable routes. And they have the ability to recharge when they return to base. Now, I know some of you were probably thinking earlier, I said that New Jersey's drayage fleet is a bit different than California's. We don't have large fleets, but instead lots of individual owner operators. So I want to address the question that's probably come to your mind right off the bat here is, well, they don't really have a base, and that's true. Most of those drivers, when they're done with their shift, they drive home and they park the truck in their driveway. But they do return on a regular basis to the port and to those warehouse and distribution facilities. So those would be the potential locations for charging infrastructure. Granted, this particular rule scenario concept that we're looking at here doesn't specifically address the infrastructure, but obviously the two go hand in hand. So that becomes the option or opportunity, best opportunity for charging of these vehicles. There are lots of those vehicles available, currently over 70 models, most of them with a greater than 100-mile range, which is longer than most drayage routes. There are more and more offerings from different manufacturers each year, and they keep increasing the range. It's sort of the big competition among the manufacturers at the moment is who can have claim to the longest usable range. There are The drayage trucks would probably come within this heavy-duty truck category here. And when CARB had put this together earlier this year, or maybe it was late last year as part of their presentation, they had found 15 battery electric vehicles within that category that are offered on the market for sale today. That's also possible there might be some drayage trucks within the yard tractor category, although these tend to be more the really local vehicles that operate just within a port or within a warehouse facility. Several manufacturers most of us have probably heard of that either already have or have announced plans for vehicles in these classes, in these types, available for sale and for use in the next couple of years. And of course, it's not just the vehicles, it's also the servicing and support of them. Penske and Ryder have both made announcements that they will be supporting the servicing and the leasing options with electric vehicles. So there are lots of support, not just on the vehicle itself, but the whole environment, the maintenance, the charging, the support for it. Most folks are aware of the fact that there are higher upfront costs for battery electric vehicles for zero emission trucks at the moment, but over the lifetime, the operating costs tend to be lower than conventional trucks, so that the total cost of ownership can be comparable, can even be lower depending on the exact duty cycle. There also are some support programs, grant and rebate programs that are available in some cases to help offset that initial cost. One of the questions that comes up whenever you're talking about potentially doing some regulation is, who exactly do you hold responsible for the actions that you're looking to have happen? Again, we're not exactly sure how CARB will proceed. They may look at the port trucking contractors, the truck brokers who schedule and coordinate the trucks. They are doing a bit with large fleets in their current rule. Obviously, as I said before, that probably won't apply or be as useful for us here, but it's something that is a possibility of how we look at the process of who to work with and who to regulate or who to work with on getting this transition to happen. Pardon me. Okay. And finally, phase in. California did phase in their past regulation, the one that's currently on the books from 2007, and it's very likely they will do the same thing in the transition to electric vehicles. Not sure how they might target it, not sure how we might approach it, but a couple possibilities here. We could start with some of the oldest trucks to be replaced first. Largest fleets, again, that may not help us much. The initial requirements would follow some number of years after charging infrastructure installation. There's some possible tie-in with that. California, as I'd said earlier, is saying they're looking at having this start in 2024 and probably move to full transition, fully electric by 2030. What exactly our schedule might be here in New Jersey could be similar, could be shifted a little bit. There are some legal questions we're actually still trying to pin down in-house as to what we may be limited on doing, but any input that everyone on the line here has on the phase-in would also be greatly appreciated. And that brings us to some discussion issues. So I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes here so people can take a look at the different things we're like feedback in, although it's not limited to this. Information on schedule, implementation issues, charging infrastructure, yes, is certainly a question we know is going to be on everyone's mind. Who the regulated parties should be, who would be best to work with on this. And then I will turn it back over to Peg or whoever has been monitoring the chats and hand raising. And I will switch back to Teams and
Okay, so Lisa has her hand up and she can unmute herself and ask her question or make her statement.
Great, thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Not sure if you can see me. Hang on. There we go. There I am. Yeah, I have a few items for discussion that are based on some notes that I took and concerns that I have. I'm the president of the Bi-State Motor Carriers. We represent the truckers who pull the freight at the port of New York, New Jersey. So a couple things. We've said quite a few times during this presentation and the one this morning that we're leaning heavily on California for guidance. And that's a problem because New Jersey has some very key issues that make us very different from California. So I just wanted to point those out. The first one that occurred to me on this morning's call was when we were talking about the demand for electrical on the grid. Once we start ramping up this push towards electric vehicles and the infrastructure, that we need to build up in order to have capacity for all of this charging. One of the things about California, the ports in California specifically, their hours are not the same as New York, New Jersey. We only have one shift here in New Jersey, and that's a daytime shift. Whereas in California, they have two shifts. So they have 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. So their window of time is far more spread out in terms of when these trucks might be charging. Whereas in New Jersey, we have a much more narrowly focused time window when that would be happening. And unfortunately, it would be happening during the same time as all of the other vehicles like mine. If I had an electric car and, come home after work, and I would be charging at the same time as these trucks. So when we look at the impact on the grid, that is something we need to consider that is different in New Jersey than in California. One of the other things that is different in New Jersey is our hours are not consistent from terminal to terminal. So there's not one terminal is open at a different time than another, and those hours are in flux depending on the freight as it comes in. So again, that's going to impact the level of drain on the grid. The infrastructure in New Jersey, and I'm speaking specifically about the roads and the traffic and the congestion, is very different than it is out in California in those ports. So that is something that we really need to consider because the trucks, it takes them longer to get through the area. If we could solve the congestion and the traffic issues, that would really help with the emissions. We can't pollute the air if we're not there. So that's something that I think we can look at in New Jersey. Another concern that I have is the weather is different in New Jersey. I was reading up on this, and electric vehicles can cover 20% fewer miles in colder weather. That's going to be a concern for us. We can't have this truck get 80% of the way to where he's going and then be stranded. There's also limitations when the weather is cold in terms of battery charging. Fast charging is not available. That is my understanding from what I've been reading. It's very limited during periods of cold weather. So again, the charging capabilities for these trucks are not going to be what we need them to be in order to keep the supply chain moving. That is a concern that I have. You guys also brought up the logistical impacts of the number of independent owner-operators that we have in New Jersey, and that is a very big concern on several fronts. First of all, it's the expense. It would be these individual business owners that are going to be absorbing the expense of financing an electric vehicle, especially if we're having these aggressive timelines that California is looking at. 2030 is less than 10 years from now. And so you would have to have these independent business owners who are, according to the Department of Labor Statistics, are primarily minority business owners who would be having to go into debt in order to finance these trucks, these vehicles. Also, I have to point out, I'm sure we're all aware, the gas tax is going to be going up in New Jersey on October 1st. We'll have the 4th highest gas tax in the nation. So we're going to be putting that on top of that expense of the electric vehicles, and then all the toll increases that we're subject to now as of September 1st. So these are all small business owners in New Jersey. 70% of the drivers who move that freight in New Jersey are owner operators. So we're not talking an insignificant number. This is the majority of the drivers are going to have these issues. So this is something that we really need to take into consideration, especially in looking at the timeframes that we're speaking about for some of these things. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was why we're different on the East Coast is the competition. the level of competition here is so much higher. California, it covers so much ground. They make changes, and the shippers really don't have a lot of choice as to where they can go for an alternate. As opposed to New York and New Jersey, there are numerous ports around here that they can go to. They can go up to Boston. They can go to Philly. They can go anywhere down. Savannah has seen a market share increase. And we believe that is in part due to a lot of these mandates that are being put on the trucking community. And these are not mandatory at any other port on the Eastern Seaboard. They are voluntary programs for truck replacement, but they're not mandatory. So that's a difference in New Jersey that is driving our business away, our market share away, and driving our truckers away. So these are all concerns that I have that I think we need to keep in mind as we talk about the timelines, as we talk about what sorts of restrictions and mandates we want to put into place. And absolutely, the last thing is to make sure that the trucking community has a place at the table throughout these discussions and as you're coming up with your policy decisions, so that we can give you this kind of insight that maybe you don't normally have.
Thank you, Lisa. Very, very good points. Appreciate the feedback.
Lisa, can I ask for a little more information on two of the points that you made?
Sure.
So one of the things you said, you were talking about the independent owner operators. I was wondering if you can explain to us, I don't know the right way to say it because I don't know the structure, but there are organizations or trucking firms that are above those IOOs in the food chain. So could you explain how an independent person gets the call or gets the job, and who the middle people are, and whether those are potential sources of regulation instead of the individual truckers?
Well, and that's just it. The independent owner operators, they are small business owners. They own the truck. So if there's going to be regulation of the truck, they would be the responsible party. They can lease. Independent by owner operators by nature can work for whomever they wish, whenever they wish. And so they can contract or lease with several different companies, so that, you might have a guy who's working for one company in the morning, another company in the afternoon, another company next week. They go where the work is, and that's the beauty of the job. They love that flexibility, and I can see why. So that's why I think it would be really tough to go after the motor carrier companies specifically, because these drivers do come and go and they hop around.
Okay, thank you for that. My second question was, you made a comment that with the weather being colder in New Jersey, we know that EVs cover, the battery doesn't last as long. Do you have an approximation of the average number of miles that a dray truck would travel in a given day? Like how far from the port are they going out for their first drop or second drop and then coming back? Like, what's the approximate?
That I can get for you. I can poll some of our members and get some figures for you. But honestly, it varies so widely. We have some members that do a couple miles back and forth. If they are located very close to the port, they're just doing those little short trips. But then we have ones that are going 100 miles. Or that are going out to, Pennsylvania and back, or upstate New York and back. It all depends. It depends on who their customers are. It depends on the time of year. There are a lot of variables. That's why, it seems so simple on paper. Why can't we do this? Why California is doing it. Why can't we? And that's why I'm trying to weigh in on this, is that there are very specific differences to New Jersey that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think this is simple by any stretch of the imagination, and that's why we're trying to gather information, and I'm glad you were able to participate today. So thank you.
Thanks, me too.
I was just going to chime in on the technology issues. You already talked about the cold temperature issues. As a family, we have 2 EVs, so I'm used to the cold temperature impacts. I essentially just sort of automatically downrate my sense of mileage based on what's needed. So if the drayage truck has a 100-mile range and you can buy one with a 200-mile range, but it'll only get 150 miles when it's cold, well, it's still a 150-mile truck. So I just sort of, in my mind, I just downgrade it for the temperature impacts to compensate for a worst case scenario, and then you could still get a truck that meets the needs if they're available. I'm just saying it's a possibility.
And also, that's a great idea, but unfortunately, it's for me, the comparison would be like, I would love to have a car that has seat heat because I get cold in the winter, but if I can't afford to get one that has that option, and it's the same thing, it's easy to say, well, they should just get a truck that can allow for however far they need to go just in case. But, you know, in reality, that's not really a good option for most folks to buy the highest end vehicle.
I'm not talking about the highest end vehicle. I'm just talking about as a concept to match the vehicle to your needs. I'm not saying they all have to go out and buy one with huge range. That's not what I'm saying. On the charging issue, in terms of the port scheduling, that's another good thing to take into consideration. But our motto there is managed charging. I charge my vehicles in the middle of the night. They charge up like, I think they could start charging as late as 9 p.m. and finish charging at 6 a.m. or something like that. So you charge in the middle of the night. It's all about managed charging so that not everybody is charging at 5 p.m. when they come home and plug in. There are ways to manage that technology-wise, but that's all.
How would you propose that we manage it with the independent owner-operators, where we just said 70% of them in New York and New Jersey are independent, and they're going home to their home base? You know, they can't drive back to the warehouse at midnight and start charging their vehicle. So how will that work?
I don't have an answer for you today. Sorry.
Yep. I wanted to give Pam Frank a moment to ask her question if she's still on the line. She has to leave at 2:30, and I know we're 1 minute away from that. So Pam, if you are still on and can speak quickly, which I know you can,
I am.
why don't you give it a shot?
Yeah, so Lisa, I appreciated Lisa's comments before, and I'll be quick here. Because I consider this issue, the drayage issue, such an important focus for New Jersey, not just because the environmental justice concerns about, you know, the pollutants that are sort of being left in these surrounding communities to the port, but also it gets to Lisa's point about the drivers themselves, right? The drivers themselves are a population of people that are probably lower middle income, right? And so I just wanted to share, because in the recent month or so, I've been having conversations with companies, and this is very interesting, it's a new model, that want to, because New Jersey is, you know, the drayage population is mostly independently operated, companies that actually want to come along and take all of, they basically want to lease electric trucks to those drivers and take all of the risk, the technology risk and the fueling risk. They basically want to be able to provide those trucks for the use cases those drivers need them for and the fueling needed for them. There's a question about, you know, where those fueling depots are and how the drivers, to Lisa's point, they go home at night, right? So maybe instead of reporting to work at the port, they're going to a port adjacent parking depot area, right, where they pick up their car for the day. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight it because it's a very interesting model that we should all be thinking more about to try to figure out how to help animate those kinds of business models, because I think that potentially is a very interesting solution that could help the drivers and obviously the environment too.
Pam, if you have specific contacts or information on those companies, please forward that along. That is not a concept I was all that familiar with at all and would love to know more about.
Yeah, I will, and I was very excited.
I agree with you. Just from your brief description, that sounds like it touches a lot of the critical points that Lisa just brought up and a lot of the issues we've all been staring at each other, well, not directly, but virtually recently, wondering how the heck are we going to crack this egg?
Yep, it's an egg worth cracking. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Pam. I also wanted to emphasize one of the things that Jeff had shown on one of his slides, and that is California's rulemaking is anticipating maybe going into effect 2024 with a phase-in period for compliance until 2030. So this is not something that we're talking about doing immediately or doing overnight. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that, California's proposed timeline. Monica, can you call out who had their next hand raised, what the order will be?
Okay, Ezra, you can unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. This is Ezra Finken again with the Diesel Technology Forum. I just had 2 comments and a request, kind of in response to some of the material that was presented. First up, I think I heard, and I hope I heard this correctly, and if not, please inform me. But one of the reasons why you folks are looking to adopt California's electric dray truck rule is in part to respond to the need to reduce PM2.5. You know, we looked into this. There's been some published research by EPA, particularly in their National Port Strategy Assessment. We looked at the data, and anytime you're taking an older truck, so we define that as model year 2006 or older, and that's important because those trucks don't have particulate filters. So if you replace them with a brand new diesel truck sitting on a lot today that comes with a filter, or a battery electric model, the PM2.5 reductions are essentially identical. Yes, diesel has a tiny bit of PM2.5 in addition to the electric replacement, but essentially those filters are so effective in removing PM2.5 that there are literally trace amounts coming out of the tailpipe. What you have left, and the reason why there are still emissions from battery electric trucks and why that emissions profile is very close to diesel, is because the vast majority of emissions generated by these trucks come from brake and tire wear. And the last time I checked, electric trucks still have brakes and tires. So I would just caution you folks in referencing the fact that you need to move away from diesel as a PM2.5 control strategy. The second comment I had, and again, this will get into my request, is I really don't see how replacing 15,000 dray trucks in New Jersey is going to move the needle on climate. I mean, there's probably hundreds of thousands of medium heavy-duty trucks in New Jersey, probably performing far more miles than dray trucks. And replacing 15,000 of these dray trucks with all electric, I don't see how that's really moving the needle. But I understand perhaps this is part of a beachhead strategy where as long as you see an electric truck, it creates its own momentum and people invest time and energy to understand how they can adopt more of those into their operations. And here it gets to my request is instead of waiting until 2030 for the slow adoption of these zero emission all electric dray trucks, you know, there are solutions ready to go right now, probably much lower cost to contribute some significant climate benefits from those vehicles. And here I'm referencing biofuels. Renewable diesel and biodiesel fuel. These are fuels that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions immediately in a low-cost way by at least 50%. In the case of renewable diesel fuel, that's upwards of 80%. We've seen cities out in California, particularly the city of Oakland, they're using renewable diesel fuel exclusively in their fleet of heavy-duty vehicles and equipment, achieving some big benefits. New York City also, they've agreed to use renewable diesel fuel in their fleet of heavy-duty vehicles and equipment. Here in Washington, D.C., the refuse haulers in the city have some proprietary technology that makes it so that they can only use 100% biodiesel fuel. So if you attempt to put ULSD into that tank, it will not accept that fuel. You can only use 100% biodiesel. So as you folks look to consider strategies to slowly adopt zero emission dray trucks by 2030, I'm curious to get your feedback on strategies to incorporate more of these very low-cost biofuels to generate some big immediate-term benefits while these electric dray trucks come into service in the out years.
Ezra, can you talk a little bit about the infrastructure that would be needed to provide those renewable fuels and whether it would be cost effective for us to invest, for the state to invest in that infrastructure at the same time that it's investing in electrical infrastructure?
Sure, there's no additional infrastructure needs for renewable diesel and biodiesel fuel. They share the same tanks, the same fueling infrastructure. In the case of renewable diesel fuel, it meets the same engineering spec as petroleum diesel. So for fueling infrastructure, it's essentially petroleum diesel fuel. There's no additional infrastructure needs beyond some regulatory requirements for labeling on pumps. That's basically it.
So the production and supply is already here in New Jersey? It's already being produced and delivered?
In New York City, the city has procured sources to meet its needs.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Peg, I thought your question was more on the refining. Renewable diesel is a refined product, so you need a refinery to produce it. So that's what I thought your question was.
Yes,
do we need
that was my question.
infrastructure
I didn't
here?
articulate it well.
Yeah, because I know otherwise it is identical to diesel fuel and can be distributed and kept the same way, but it needs to be refined somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, if I can just respond quickly to that point,
Sure.
just this week there were some big announcements by oil majors, Phillips 66, Exxon, Marathon. They're retooling refineries away from petroleum products to produce renewable diesel fuel.
Okay, good news.
Monica, can you call on the next person?
Ryan, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. It's also just a point to the previous comment about will the drayage trucks, there's only 15,000 of them, will they have a real environmental impact because they go low mileage? One of the things that I look at is more the engine hours and idle times that they have in the ports. I think that's just important to consider, especially these older 2006 ones. They might idle for 3-4 hours in the port, even if they only go 5 miles. So that's just something to consider when you think of, will it have a real environmental impact? So just wanted to draw attention to that. And then not to solicit or do anything like that. That's truly not my intention. Ryder and Penske would be some of those partners that Pam was speaking about, to partner with independent owner operators and take that investment cost on for them, so they don't have to go out and spend $150,000 in a clip or go to a bank or something like that. So I do think that is a good idea for your team to pursue. So not really a question, just a couple comments on things I noticed.
Thank you, Ryan.
Amy, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your statement.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to respond to a few comments that were made and sort of reinforce some comments that were made subsequent to that. So I think the idea of having people take their truck to a yard, plug in and get in their car and go home is a way better option for lots of reasons. Nobody wants these trucks in the neighborhood driving down people's residential neighborhoods, and that's what's happening, is that people are parking them in neighborhoods, and they really should be in an industrial or a commercial zone, and what better place than a place that they could hook up into that. So whether it's leasing trucks, as was discussed by Pam and sort of reinforced by Ryan, I think that's a great idea. The point that was made that owner operators are free to do whatever they want is completely untrue at the ports. They have to sign agreements with that middle person that you were talking about, Peg, and they basically have to do exclusives with them. There are owner operators that are free to go where they want, but not typically at the port. They get their orders from the person that whether it's Ironbound Express or others. They get their orders where to go, where to pick up. They pay by the load. It's all on their dime, the workers' dime, and they're not treated as employees, and it's wrong. And I think we should change the model. And while this is an environmental strategy that you're talking about, it might give an opportunity to actually change the model so that these owner operators, if they choose to, can be employees and covered by workers' comp. And they are getting very sick in these vehicles because they're sucking in the fumes from their dirty diesel as well as from the trucks that they're idling behind all day long. So I just want to, I think there is an opportunity potentially if you don't let trucks go in the gate, and if the orders and the instructions to the drivers is coming from these middle people, maybe you just don't let them do business at the port and don't let them go in and out, and sort of and if we can figure out this sort of a lease model or another model so the drivers don't have the burden of maintaining the trucks, which has always been an issue, that would be a great thing to do. And we, Clean Water Action, and other organizations in the environmental community are against biodiesel. It is a petroleum product. We're trying to get away from diesel. We're trying to get to another strategy here. We know it takes power to electrify, but it's significantly less pollution. And the question about climate benefit, black carbon, which we're looking forward to the DEP regulating in the near future, the main source of black carbon is diesel from not just trucks, but, you know, boilers and other things. And black carbon is one of the leading reasons why ice is melting in the world. And if we want to directly impact black carbon and climate change, you know, this is the place to be. And so I just want to, and trucks that are at a port, you know, they're not long haul. I'm differentiating long haul from like short deliveries or port trucks. The other thing about those trucks is they never actually get to their maximum efficiency. So even if they're the cleanest diesel truck in the world and the newest, they don't get their temperatures up very high because they're idling. And we've done work and done some monitoring and worked with Cummins on some of this. And, you know, they just never burn hot enough, you know, consistently enough to get the benefit. So moving these vehicles to electric would be, you know, tremendous in the community, but also because of the other factors of them sitting around idling for hours or you know, not being able to get up to the speed and the temperatures. So we really want to make sure that the DEP skips all the crazy fuels in between and moves to electric as efficiently and effectively as possible. And we know it's not going to happen overnight, but we know this is where you need to go, and the industry is moving fast. And I think, you know, the battery technologies will keep moving along. And I just want to say one thing about one last point is that I think it would be really important in investigating how you're going to do powering up, you know, plugins and the like, that when you're thinking about the port or thinking about where to locate these, that you have to think about climate resiliency and to make sure that we're moving that infrastructure to be mobile. There are some technologies around that are not just like plug it into the ground, but that you can actually move the charging station. And so we know the port was underwater for not totally underwater, but was non-operational for several weeks after Sandy. We could have lost all that infrastructure. So thinking about where to locate it, where to move it when a storm comes, I think is also part of preserving, you know, the investment, whether it's private or public dollars. So I just want to sort of counter some points, support some points, and encourage you to keep moving forward towards electrification.
Okay, thank you, Amy.
Lisa, you can unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question.
Thanks. It's just a quick comment. I'm not going to hijack this forum. I think what we're talking about as far as moving towards cleaner air is too important to bring in other topics that others might want to try to advance. I just want to respond to a couple of things that were said about independent owner-operators. Maintaining their trucks is not a burden. It's what they choose to do. They choose to be business owners, and I don't want to get into the whole independent owner-operator classification issues, but the business model that was proposed earlier where these independent owner-operators would have trucks leased to them, and that would run them afoul of the current misclassification laws that we have in New Jersey. We have some of the strictest and strongest misclassification laws that were passed this year, and that would go counter to those regulations. So that would not be something that we could see a separate company providing trucks to independent business owners. They would be classified as employees if that were to happen. So we can't have that as an option, I don't believe. But I just want to also say that what we're talking about is too important to try and leverage as an opportunity to open up this talk about eliminating independent contractors or reclassifying them or changing that business model. This is not the forum for that. And I just wanted to say that I'd really like to get back on the topic of emissions and keep it there.
Okay. Fair point. Thank you, Lisa.
Jonathan Smith, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your statement.
Sure, thank you, everyone. And I'll echo what Amy and others said about the importance of moving towards electrification as quickly as possible. And I appreciate all the work that DEP has done in looking into possible adoption of these California rules. And I was also curious about whether in the interim, DEP has also given some thought about adopting the existing California drayage rules, I believe the 2007 rules that were discussed earlier, or whether so far it's just been looking into the rules that are coming in the future.
Jeff, I think that was part of your presentation, if I remember right, that adopting the existing regs as well as considering the future regs are both on the table.
Yes, they are, although I think our thought had been to push much more for the future, the electric regulations. Part of the reason being the 07 regulations that CARB has on the books have been fully phased in. And while our fleet is certainly older than theirs, in part because we haven't had those same regulations for the last 10, 12 years, there's not the fleet has, just through natural turnover, improved somewhat. And I don't know whether it would get us, for all the hassle it would gain, how much it would get us. It would be great and wonderful to do all the various things that everyone has mentioned or discussed and suggested in the last hour here as we've been discussing this. And that certainly would get us the furthest down the line. Unfortunately, all the various resources that there are, time, money, infrastructure, etc., are not infinite, and we can't quite do all of them at once.
There have been a lot of discussions today regarding interim strategies before we get to these things that we could potentially adopt to phase in from California. But keep in mind, it takes like a couple years for us to do our rulemaking, and by then we're halfway to the point where we could have started phasing in California strategy. So to Jeff's point, yeah, I don't know that we have time to do something regulatorily now to get it in effect, to be effective before just adopting the California stuff to phase in, if that makes sense. I don't know if there's enough time to do something else.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, Peg, there aren't any more hands raised. So if you want to take a look at the chat box and answer questions there.
Yeah, I don't, there's some back and forth in the chat box about whether trucks calling on the port are actually idling. I think that's subjective and probably not useful to get into as part of this group discussion. We could handle that offline if necessary. Let's see. We already talked about Lisa's comment. I don't see anything else. Participants, feel free to shout out if you put something in the chat box that I'm missing that hasn't been addressed yet. Okay. So we are about an hour and a half ahead of schedule. We were scheduled to go until 4:30. Happy to keep it open for a few more minutes. If people want to raise their hand, make a comment, questions, observations. Okay. Seeing none, Jeff, can you remind us one more time when comments are due?
I can do that. Comments are due on September 24th. Give me a minute. I will bring up that and share that slide. There we go. with the email address. Is that working? Are we seeing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So, yes, as with all of the rules, if you have additional comments that you'd like to make, or you want to put the comments you've put here in writing to make sure that they get properly captured, send an email to njairrulesmobile@dep.nj.gov. Put in the subject line drayage trucks so we know where to parse it out with all the different things we're working on, and please get those in by September 24th.
As a reminder, all of the comments submitted will become part of the public record and will be posted on the NJPACT website with the PowerPoints and the recording from today's session. I'm also, most of you know me and know that I'm happy to talk one-on-one as well if you'd like. So happy to have you call me or email me if you want to have an additional conversation about any of these issues. And then a reminder that our final stakeholdering sessions are next Wednesday, September 16th, starting at 9 o'clock. Ocean-going vessels, is that right, is in the morning, and then cargo handling equipment is in the afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock.
I think it's actually reversed, but
it's reversed. Okay, sorry about that.
I thought I remembered I was talking in the afternoon both times. That's
okay. So seeing no other hands raised and no other comments, I guess we'll go ahead and close the session and stop the recording. So you all get an hour and a half back to your day. Thank you so much for participating, and please, we encourage you to continue to send us comments, thoughts, ideas, or give me a call if you want to talk one-on-one. Thank you all.